from our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. The Alabama Legislature's 2025 regular session is in the books. The House and Senate met for the 30th and final legislative day on Wednesday, going all the way to midnight attempting to pass legislation. Much of the second half of this session has been marked by a logjam of legislation in the Senate. That's where we'll start our coverage of the end of the session this week. Senate Democrats led a prolonged filibuster Wednesday that stalled proceedings and prevented even non-controversial local bills from passing as the clock ran out. Capitol Journal's Jeff Sanders has more on what led to the standoff and what legislation managed to make it through.
On confirmations.
In a session that was anything but quiet, the Alabama Senate closed out the 2025 legislative calendar with nearly 11 hours of delay, most of it fueled by a sustained Democratic filibuster. At issue, two controversial bills, HB 202, the Back the Blue Law Enforcement Immunity Bill, and SB 330, which reshapes oversight of the Birmingham Water Works Board. It already passed earlier in the session, sparking outrage from Democrats who said the measure stripped local controls.
And again, people, we don't have to be in this posture. We're only in this posture because this is where y'all want to be. You want to be because this is your show them you in control. We got them under control. This is what you want to show the public.
But for Senate Minority Leader Bobby Singleton, the frustration ran deeper, especially over a House decision not to consider his local gaming legislation tied to the Green Track gaming facility in Greene County.
We just want to make sure that we're being treated equally in this process. You're not going to run over us, because at the end of the day, if you take this mic and you do this, it's just time for us. That's all it is. It's just time.
Republicans used cloture to end debate throughout the day, but even so, only about a dozen local bills received final passage, out of roughly 50 bills on the calendar to start the day.
Now, when it comes down to this calendar, and all of these bills on here are local bills. We've never had a calendar. This almost looked like the Big Bertha calendars. We've never had a calendar like this. Long. All of these bills are the ones that we could have passed if we had just been fair about home rule of others.
As the clock neared midnight, Republicans managed to give final passage to the Back the Blue bill, sending it to Governor Kay Ivey, who has since signed it into law.
This is something that's needed in the state of Alabama to clarify where they stand, what they do. We ask the law enforcement officers to go into our communities and protect us. We ask them to take care of us, keep us safe in our homes while we sleep at night.
It just disappoints me that the goal of somebody get pissed off because you don't like the fact that we don't want to get blowed away. I see the attitudes. You think we supposed to be happy getting blowed away?
Throughout the night, Republican and Democratic leaders held a series of private meetings to salvage what they could. Senate President Pro Tem Garland Gudger maintained the process remained fair.
We're going to start having leadership meetings immediately, figuring out if there's going to be any rule changes and seeing how we can make this particular body function better on both sides of the aisle so that when we do come back, we're able to make sure that everybody is being treated as fairly as possible. You heard some people tonight saying they didn't treat them fairly tonight, but if you look back into how many minutes they've had at the mic, I think they've had more minutes than anybody else on the floor.
Gudger also reflected on lessons he's learned during his first session as pro tem.
Managing the different personalities that are here, because everyone is not only a type A personality, but they want the best for their home, right, and for their constituents back home. How they get to that point is so different with each individual colleague that's here and each of the people that we have here. We're blessed to have all leaders and influential people.
Barring a special session later this year, lawmakers will return to the State House to do it all over again in 2026. Reporting from the State House in Montgomery, I'm Jeff Sanders for Capitol Journal.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'll be speaking in more detail with Senate President Pro Tem Garland Gudger later in the show. Well, once the Senate did pass that Back the Blue legislation, it had to go back to the House for final passage. The lower chamber didn't have much time to act, but the Republican majority was determined to pass the signature piece of the Safe Alabama package that was the top priority for Governor Kay Ivey and legislative leadership from the beginning of the session. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott covered the action in the House.
The 2025 regular session had plenty of bills to debate, from Senate Bill 330, dealing with restructuring the Birmingham Waterworks system.
What they're doing is just unacceptable. They are the lowest rated on J.D. Powers on customer service of any large water system.
Two proposals addressing health care expansion.
And most of us think, well, I've got health insurance, I'm okay. But when your premiums go up because that number of people who are receiving health care don't have health insurance, it impacts each and every one of us. That's why so many hospitals are closing after COVID.
One of the biggest bills up for debate is House Bill 202.
This HB 202, Back the Blue bill, there was 3 amendments received from Senator Singleton in the committee. They came off the floor today, just a little while ago, as a sub. That's dealing with law enforcement recordings, data collection, and the Joint Legislative Committee Study Commission on Law Enforcement.
It's part of Governor Kay Ivey's public safety package of bills to improve Alabama law enforcement. There are legal concerns about this bill.
What it actually is doing is taking away judicial discretion. It is dictating to the courts and judges on how they should view police officers. So when you're looking at it as a whole, I think it's unconstitutional based upon that in and of itself.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around why would we give a bad actor the power of the judge and the jury and the prosecutor.
As well as personal concerns.
I've been stopped and I've been treated like I was not a person. Instead of being courteous and acting in a humane manner, So you never experienced this because you're on the other side of this thing.
House Bill 202 passes before session time runs out.
I understand, some of the colleagues from the other side of the aisle, and I understand their comments and their plight, but we turn that nickel around, and we got to say the same thing about our fallen officers. I care about their families. In this bill, we hope will restore some faith in our officers, that we do have their back in Alabama.
At the Alabama State House, Randy Scott, Capitol Journal.
Thank you, Randy. After the legislature adjourned sine die, House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter spoke to reporters and offered some thoughts about how this session went. While not everything made it to the finish line, the Speaker said lawmakers had a productive session and that delivering the final piece of the crime package to the governor's desk was a fitting end to the session.
I think we had a great session. If you look back, I think we forget about some of the things we've done, the PBM bill, the pharmacy bill, helping protect pharmacies stay open across the state. There's no question that's going to happen. We were losing them by the dozens until that bill passed. Now they're going to get a chance to stay open and serve the people in their communities. That's a big, and you go on to the Alpha and the farmers, trying to help farmers to have insurance. I think that was a huge deal. The Veterans Resource Center, we gave this next cent off the grocery tax. In this quadrennium alone, we've given over $1.5 billion in rebates and taxes to the people of Alabama, the largest in state's history. I think tonight, Back the Blue makes us the most pro-law enforcement state in the country. I think we've got a lot to be proud of, a lot to hang our hat on. We lost some bills that I wish we'd got through. Some of the immigration bills didn't make it, and they worked really hard to try to get those done, but we always got next year, and certainly the members have done a really good job. I can't thank our members enough to stay into the late hour to try to get a bill that was important to law enforcement across this state. And that's what we talked about after we went in. We met this afternoon late, and talked to them about staying to try to finish up the work on that particular bill because, the men and women in blue protect us every morning, night, and every afternoon. And we just had to stay another hour and a half to give them more protection. So I think that's a big deal for the people in this state. I think it's a big deal for the people that wear the uniforms.
Well, with the end of the session comes bill signing season. Governor Kay Ivey this week signed a number of bills into law, including the bill banning cell phones in Alabama public schools. The FOCUS Act from State Representative Lee Hulsey and State Senator Donnie Chasteen requires students' phones be turned off and stored off of their person during school hours. Some schools already ban the use of devices, but this legislation will require all school systems to do so, leaving it up to the individual systems to decide how the devices will be stored. The Focus Act also requires the Alabama State Department of Education to offer social media safety training for all students before entering the 8th grade. Ivy also signed into law the Powering Growth Act. Sponsored by State Senator Arthur Orr, the new law is designed to accelerate energy infrastructure projects for industrial development, particularly in rural areas. The bill will establish the Alabama Energy Infrastructure Bank under the State Industrial Development Authority. That entity will be charged with financing energy infrastructure projects that support economic development. And the law authorizes the agency to issue up to $1 billion in bonds. Other bills being signed into law this week by Governor Ivey include House Bill 386 from State Representative Danny Garrett, which takes another cent off the state's sales tax on groceries. State sales tax on food will now be 2% starting September 1st. That's down from 4% originally. Senate Bill 330 from State Senator Dan Roberts. It reconstitutes the Birmingham Water Works Board to add seats from communities surrounding Birmingham that are customers of the system. Supporters say the change is necessary due to skyrocketing water and sewer fees that they attribute to a dysfunctional board. House Bill 307 from State Representative Jim Hill, known as the Speedy Trial Act. The new law will allow the Chief Justice, at the request of the Attorney General or a district attorney, to assign a retired judge or a judge from a different circuit to come preside over violent crime cases where there is a backlog. House Bill 152 from State Representative Neil Rafferty, which eliminates state sales tax on diapers, baby supplies, maternity clothing, and feminine products. House Bill 199 from State Representative Travis Hendricks, which aims to crack down on juvenile crime by enhancing electronic monitoring of those deemed to be dangerous. And Senate Bill 158 from State Senator Will Barfoot, which prohibits foreign national driver's licenses from being used as a form of voter ID. Governor Ivey also signed legislation aimed to limit and regulate hemp-based consumable products like vapes and gummies and drinks containing THC. I spoke this week with State Representative Andy Witt, who sponsored the bill, about why it was necessary.
The hemp industry was basically the Wild West since the 2018 Farm Bill, and it created numerous loopholes in the state of Alabama. And it began with edibles, it began then with gummies at our local convenience stores, it morphed into THC-infused beverages, and then it morphed into also beverages being sold at restaurants, bars, things of that nature. As I spoke in committee, you could come down 65 and get a 50 milligram THC-infused slushy on your way to the beach. So, really? Yeah, it was a lot of scary products out there, and in the committee meetings and even on the floor, I brought some of the samples and things for the members because this is a lot of products they're not familiar with. But I think all of Alabama is that visits the convenience stores sees all of the Delta 8, 9. I know they see the flags and the vape shops and things like that that's advertising these drugs basically and synthetics that are targeting our children. Understand there is no State Department that's over those. ALEA doesn't manage it. The Health Department doesn't manage it. And ABC doesn't manage it. So no one has the authority to go in. Todd, you and I could make this product and put it in convenience stores and sell it. That's the way
without any approval.
Without any approval, any testing, any regulation, or anything. So, how safe is that? It's not safe.
Stepping back from just this week, this year's legislative session really has been action-packed, with many consequential bills passing. Let's take a look back at some of the notable legislation enacted this year. Start with legislation reforming how pharmacy benefit managers do business with pharmacies. This bill was supported by local pharmacists who say these PBMs charge unfair rates and are causing many local pharmacies to go out of business. The Alpha Health Plan bill. This will allow the Alabama Farmers Federation to sell health benefit plans to its members. Legislation revamping the governance structure of the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs. The Commissioner of Veterans Affairs is now a cabinet member, and the board overseeing the department is now an advisory board rather than a governing board. This, of course, came in the wake of former VA Commissioner Kent Davis's dismissal last year following a messy interagency dispute. Lulu's Law. This will institute a shark warning system at Alabama's Gulf beaches, similar to Amber Alerts. It was inspired and promoted by Lulu Gribben, the Mountain Brook teenager who survived a shark attack last year. A ban on so-called Glock switches, which turn regular pistols effectively into machine guns. It was also part of that Safe Alabama legislative package. The RAISE Act, which will modernize how Alabama allocates funding to public schools, with extra support for special needs, English language learners, students in poverty, and gifted students. Multiple immigration-related bills passed, including measures to crack down on human smuggling and requiring law enforcement to collect DNA from illegal immigrants they detained for identification purposes. Legislation requiring smartphone manufacturers to activate content filters on phones sold to minors, and making Juneteenth an official state holiday. Turning to Washington for a moment, where tensions ran high on Capitol Hill as Republicans advanced critical parts of President Trump's budget plan. Multiple protests interrupted committee proceedings over plans to enact cuts to Medicaid and food stamps. Alex Engel reports from Capitol Hill on how Alabama's delegation was involved.
Key House committees advanced controversial portions of the budget bill this week along party lines. The proposals tackle health care to food assistance to boosting tax breaks. Alabama's Republicans defended the measures in committees this week, while the state's Democrats warned about the possible negative impacts of the plans. Protesters filled the halls of a House office building Wednesday to fight against the GOP plan to add new work and eligibility requirements to Medicaid. One protester even interrupted Congressman Gary Palmer as he was defending the changes during the Energy and Commerce budget markup.
Many of the people who've spoken out here and had to be removed, they're not going to lose their Medicaid. The interesting thing is,
the proposed billions in cuts to Medicaid will help offset extending Trump's tax cuts and covering other breaks like no tax on overtime. The Ways and Means Committee advanced those tax cuts after a grueling markup this week. Congresswoman Terry Sewell sits on that committee. She fought against the proposed Medicaid cuts.
These cuts are about more than just statistics. They're about lives and livelihoods. Real people will be impacted by the actions that we take.
The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is also facing significant changes. Republican lawmakers proposed partially shifting costs of the program to states and expanding work requirements for benefits. Congressman Barry Moore on the Agriculture Committee says the changes would encourage states to, quote, have more skin in the game.
So there has to be a carrot stick program, as I call it. So the carrot is, hey, we're going to provide this money. The stick is, you got to manage it. If we're finding fraud, you're going to be accountable for fraud, and that's taxpayer money.
But Congressman Shamari Figures, who also represents Alabama on the Ag Committee, says the proposal will make more people hungry.
And adding these administrative burdens and other resource cuts, we're going to increase the error rates that we're trying to reduce and further penalize the states for doing that.
The budget bill now goes to the House Budget Committee, followed by the Rules Committee, and then to the House floor for a vote. Reporting on Capitol Hill, Alex Engel, Capitol Journal.
Thank you, Alex. This week, friends and former staff of former Governor Jim Folsom Jr. gathered at the Alabama Archives Building for a special reception and a screening of the new documentary on his political career. A Legacy of Progress, the Jim Folsom story, highlights the consequential career of Alabama's 50th governor, including his crowning achievement of landing Mercedes. It was a fun gathering at the archives with friends and former colleagues telling old stories from the early 90s. You just saw Carol Brown right there. There's Senate President Pro Tem Garland Gudger with Governor Folsom and former First Lady Marsha Folsom. And there they are. There's Tom Coker. It was a lot of fun. And it actually happened to be Governor Folsom's birthday. Here's a clip of the documentary.
Jim Folsom Jr. first entered the political arena in the 1970s. After graduating from Jacksonville State University, he began his career in public service.
When I became lieutenant governor,
and I was 37 years old at this point.
In the 1980s, the lieutenant governor was a tremendously powerful position.
They gave the autonomy of organizing the Senate to the lieutenant governor. That means he organized the Senate and gave the committee assignments, which is the most important thing of a 35-member Senate.
Jim's accomplishment would be more than enough to get him reelected to a second term as lieutenant governor. But just 2 years into that term, everything would change.
I, James E. Folsom Jr. I really never thought that I would become governor by ascending to the office that way.
We can count on every Friday afternoon an ethics complaint being filed.
Well, I'm not concerned about that there's going to be anything, wrong.
His opponents didn't want him to be elected in '94. So they were softening the ground to weaken him as a political candidate in '94.
Governor Folsom needed a win. He needed it fast. In 1993, Mercedes-Benz made a monumental decision.
The company had decided to build a manufacturing plant, its first outside of Germany in the U.S.
Jim Folsom Jr. has a very, very definitive legacy in Alabama history. When he brought Mercedes here, he laid the groundwork for Alabama becoming the second largest and soon to be the largest manufacturing of automobiles in the United States of America. If that's not a legacy, I don't know what is.
It really is a good show, and you can watch it online at aptv.org. We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
You're watching Alabama Public Television, celebrating 70 years of service to Alabama.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Joining me next is State Senator Garland Gudger, President Pro Tem of the Alabama State Senate. Mr. Pro Tem, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me today, Todd.
Ooh, we're through another session.
We are.
It was a slog.
It was.
It was your first as President Pro Tem of the Alabama Senate. I've got to just ask you up front, what are your reflections from this first year as leading the Senate? A tough job, a big job, but you got through it.
Well, first of all, I was honored to be able to have this position that was voted on by my peers in the Senate. And I've not taken it lightly. I've done everything I can that I could work hard, make sure I cast the vision that we wanted for our constituents throughout the state. And I do believe that we did a good job this session. As far as for me, monumental, it was my first time as the Senate Pro Tem. That's a big position in the state of Alabama, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. The volume has been more increased, right? The chaos has been a lot more. The tugging on your shoulder, hey, can I get you for a minute, has been astronomical. But in the end, I enjoy that. I like kind of bringing people together and making people come together to make a good decision for the state of Alabama. And I feel like we've done that on a lot of different views and pieces of legislation this term. I think if we just came in general and did the tax package, for example, that we passed last week, giving people back the money that they work hard for back in their pocket, and we're cutting the grocery tax, faster than anyone ever thought, and took off another cent. So now we're half of what we used to be, right? And we're doing it faster than anyone thought we were able to do that. And then left, I think people would say that was the best session we've ever had, but we've done so much more than just that. So as far as this session, I'm very proud of it. I'm proud of my colleagues in the Senate, and I think we've been working very hard and working very well with the House of Representatives as well and the Speaker.
Yeah, but let me ask you about the Senate, because it has been a difficult session. Everybody's talking about it because it slows down, right? The Senate rules are a lot different than the House. The House is very limited in terms of debate. The Senate's different. Their rules, your rules are, allows for the minority to really slow things down if you want to. Talk about that. What's it been like working with Mr. Singleton and the minority as their issue comes up and, man, they slow down a day. They try to kill a day and things like that. How's that been to try to manage that, knowing that, bills are piling up and the last day's coming?
You know, the runway that I had into this job was one day, pretty much, right? I got sworn in the first day of session, and I've been there. Before that, I've been in session for 6 years. This is my 7th session. And I've been able to try to keep up with the rules where we are. And there's been a few rule changes, but not much in my last 7 years. But the rules were what they were since I've started this job 3.5 months ago. And I've had to work with those rules and within those confines. The good thing about working with Senator Smitherman, Senator Singleton, and the Democrats is that those are the tools that they have in their tool belt, and no one can blame them to use those tools because that's what they have, right? That's what they have to use. They don't have the majority. They don't have the super vote that they can get things passed through, so they take their time and delay, and obviously, as you well know, they're great at it. So looking at those rules, that's something that I'm going to have to look at going forward with Legislative Council and saying, hey, we're going to have to change some of this as we go forward.
I was going to ask you about that. Considering the slowdowns, might we see rules changes next year, next quadrennium, something like that? Because, well, I think everybody appreciates the rules and how it gives the minority a voice. Some people are saying, like, on local legislation and things like that, maybe treat that differently than statewide legislation. Is that being considered?
It is being considered, and especially after today, when we try to get through as much legislation as we possibly can, and mainly local legislation.
Right.
You know, and all politics are local. And so those are the bills that we really need for our colleagues back home so they can be the voice for their constituents, because those local bills, they matter to the city councils, the county commissions, the probate judges, their DA that's back, the sheriff's department. And those things we need to get passed more than some of these big bills that we're trying to do statewide. And so it's a balance that's there, but we are looking at changing those rules. But you have to always remember, we can use those rules the same way to our advantage when there's something there that we want to slow down. And so you can take advantage of those tools even though we don't as much. And the reason we don't is because we have the supermajority. We have that vote. And so when we go into cloture, we can take that mic and we stay focused on the mic.
You did that once. I saw that. Yeah. That was a clever use of the rules because you kept the mic and kept kind of prevented them from filibustering.
Well, and that's the creative side, that when we use the rules, it comes to our advantage, and it's truly one-sided then because we have the vote and we have the mic. The only tool that they have is using the mic. So at times there needs to be a balance there, because my job that represents as Senate Pro Tem, the Republicans and the Democrats, is that everyone in that chamber, 35 senators, gets a voice at the mic to make sure they represent their constituents. And so that's part of it. Now, changing those rules doesn't just really help one side or the other. Those are just tools of how we're going to play the game, and we need to make sure that everybody knows that. So if we do a rule change, obviously, it would be so that everybody knows and both sides can take advantage of it. But I think on local legislation, I think there's been some issues with that, as you saw this last day, that we need to change a little bit, because one person can hold those up all day.
Right. And it's not, you mentioned the county commissions and the city councils. It's not their fault that the Constitution requires, all that to come to the legislature. And you're right, it's not controversial.
Right.
Speaking of controversial legislation, the Back the Blue, House Bill 202, all the way to the last day.
Right.
But you made it a point to finally get it across the finish line. That might have been the most controversial bill that happened. Talk about the importance of getting that final piece of the SAFE Alabama package, because I know that it was important to the governor and the legislative leadership.
Well, what you see with the Trump administration and bringing stuff from the federal government all the way down to the state and now to the locals is that we want to let everyone in Alabama see that elected officials back the blue and that they're supporting law enforcement in general and public safety. It's been too long where the law enforcement officers have been out there risking their lives and not knowing, hey, how does this affect me if something goes bad in my job? So now they're able to see, like Back the Blue that we were passing today, and the immunity they have if something bad happens on site. But from that, they know that we've got their back. And that's what they need to know as they continue to do their job, and we want to continue to keep Alabama safe, not only for our communities and our neighborhoods where we live, but for the people that are out there risking their lives for us.
Well, you also made a point of focusing on rural Alabama. You had this op-ed this week talking about, look, sometimes we take for granted what happens in the rural parts of our state, but that's the majority, really, if you think about just, all where people live and everything. Talk about why that was important and kind of some examples of focusing on rural Alabama.
No, thank you for letting me talk about it. First of all, I'm from a rural section of Alabama. And if you looked at small business, it's kind of like small business versus big business when you're talking about rural versus urban. And when you talk about small business, approximately the jobs created are over 90% of all new jobs are produced by small businesses with 50 employees or less, right, in the state of Alabama, and really nationwide, I have found out. From that, it's the same thing in rural Alabama. You're producing agriculture that's out there. We still have to have electricity and generation that's out there. We have all the blue-collar workers mainly that's in that rural sections. And so you're looking at the land mass, the state of Alabama, you're talking about 90%, right, of rural Alabama versus about 10% of urban. Now the population are in the big cities, as we know, as we say the Big Ten. But I wanted to make a focus on rural Alabama because a lot of times it's overlooked. And the reason being is it's nice to be able, like Department of Commerce, to go in and do one big corporation and give incentives to them for jobs, but you have twice as many jobs being produced over here with small businesses, but they can't get those incentives. And so as somebody that wants to make an impact for all of Alabama, I think as rural Alabama has been looked over, I want to be a champion for rural Alabama and make sure, not only in my district but statewide, that they have a voice. And this is a good way to do that, whether that's generation of electricity, whether that's economic development, whether that's making sure that they get their fair share in the roads and the road money and highway money that's coming out. But any aspect that we can bring together for rural Alabama, it makes our state stronger.
You kind of touched on this earlier, but part of being pro tem is not even legislative. You become the leader of the body, and you become involved in those conversations with the governor, the speaker. Different than just being a state senator, right?
That's
just being
correct.
a committee chairman. Talk about that role and what you've learned from that. Maybe the experience of being at that table. Like, you've got to be involved in those conversations when an economic development project comes in or when those big decisions are made. I mean, you've got that seat at the table. Has that been interesting to elevate to that position?
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So you're able to, at this particular position, Senate Pro Tem, I'm helping cast a vision for not just the Senate, but for the state of Alabama, and whether that's economic development, like we were just talking about, or whatever we're looking at into the future of where the state of Alabama wants to go. And then are we going to allocate funds to that in the budget? I've did that on a smaller scale for 14 years as president of the City Council in Coleman, Alabama. When I came to the Senate as rank and file, I was able to move up quickly as the chairman of economic development, and now I've won the Senate Pro Tem. And so being that, I've seen it at different levels, and in the end, it's all about leadership. You've got the right leaders in the place, whether that's the governor, the Speaker of the House, the Senate Pro Tem. As those three people get together and really focus on with the department heads and the administration, we come together as a team, and there hasn't been many issues that we haven't all agreed upon because we know what's right for the state of Alabama. Obviously, sometimes those get operated differently in the House than it does in the Senate because of the rules, and the same way with the governor's office, with the executive branch of government. But we work as a team, and when we work as a team, we can get so much more accomplished. And I'm proud to be in those meetings. It has been totally different than being a rank and file member, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I believe that I'm here for a purpose.
Talk about that, because when you first came on the job, I asked you kind of why you ran, and you talked about that purpose, an opportunity, seeing God work in your life and things like that. Now that you're finished with your first session, does that remain the case? Does that remain the case?
More now than ever before, Todd. Every day when you take a step of faith, and to be honest with you, at this level, it's fearful at times as a human being, saying, am I doing the right thing? Am I going in the right direction? But you keep your eyes focused on God, and every time I've taken a step out on faith and say, I believe this is where my gut is telling me to go, we've done that in the Senate, and it's been right. I mean, looking at the PBM bill, that's been working on for 20 years. I came in and we tried to bring everybody on both sides of the aisle, both sides of every aspect that they were focused to the table so they could have a voice in that piece of legislation. And in the end, we were able to thread that needle where it ended up making everyone happy. I mean, so a validation of that is when Blue Cross Blue Shield is going to be in our ceremonial picture when it's signed, And so when everybody...
Whereas they were opposed.
Because they were opposed on the other side. The key is that we've worked and we've communicated like crazy, and I've done my job because I feel like it was the right thing to do. I'm here, and you know my story. We've talked about that in the past, because I felt like God was saying, there's a door open and I want you to walk through it, and I did. There's something happened last week. A lady came up, and there's people that are in the State House that pray every day for the legislature. I didn't even know that there was a group of prayer warriors in the State House. And she came up and she spoke in Spanish. And when she came up to meet the Senate President Pro Tem, she started crying, and I thought I said something to offend her, but she couldn't speak English. And she told her husband in Spanish that at the end of last session, she saw me through the gallery and looked at me and said, God is bringing that man to a position of leadership. And she was crying when she was telling me, and I didn't know why she was crying. I thought I did something wrong. But it validates exactly what me and you just talked about. I'm here for a purpose, and I'm going to make sure that God is first in what we do in the Senate.
Wow, that's quite a story.
Thanks.
Looking towards next session.
Yeah.
There are going to be plenty of issues. You know, gambling didn't come up this year. Everybody kind of thinks that can't come up in an election year, and I guess that's what I'm going to ask you. It's going to be an election year. That starts right away. It starts really next week. So what should we be thinking about looking towards next session as we get prepared, and how do you prepare for that as leader of the Senate?
You know, so it's a new role that we talked about. I'm calling it Campaign 2026, and I've got 34 other members that I have to look out for to make sure that we take care of through this campaign season. We start next week raising money on our personal campaign funds, and by doing that, people are going to be out all over the state asking for money and going back in their districts to say, hey, number one, let me hear what you need me to do. Number two, help support me. And so I want to help with those causes as we go throughout each election that we go through. As we go for next year, gambling, to answer that question, I do not want it to come up personally. I think that there are going to be some people that want it to come up. But I think during election, it's already chaos. If you bring in gambling to that, it is mass chaos times 4 with a tornado coming through and at a circus with 3 rings going on with different people. So I think that the best thing for my colleagues in the Alabama State Senate is to go ahead and hear me say, I do not want to bring up gambling next year. And if we do that, it will take all the oxygen out of the room. So let's focus on what we need to focus on, the bills that we need to get at hand, get through the campaign season. And then the first year of the next quadrennium, I'm pretty sure it's coming back and going to be coming back hard.
Yeah.
But I will be monitoring that. But right now, my focus is on my colleagues, which is where it should be.
Well, and you kind of shut it down this session and you made that very point that you didn't want it to eat up all the oxygen in the room because there was so much else to do, so many other issues. And I guess that's part of your role is to say, okay, you got to prioritize. You only got a limited number of days. Is that why you came out and said, hey, guys, we can't do this year?
It was exactly why I did that, but I do believe it was the right decision. I think we came in too late and with too few votes. And by doing that, the legislation that I finally got to see after people were talking about it for a while, it came up, but we did a vote count in our caucus and on the floor, and it's just one of those where it didn't make sense for us to push as hard as it needed to be pushed to pass. And my personal opinion is that if it's not ready to go and you've got your 21 votes for a constitutional amendment vote on the Senate floor, then it doesn't need even to be introduced. And so the key for me was we need to make a decision one way or the other, and I've been here for 7 years now, and every year it has creeped up on us to the point by the end of session, everybody, that's what they're talking about. I did not want that to happen my first session. I wanted us to have good, clean votes where our head was very clear and not clouded by these type of issues. And so I wanted to make sure everyone in my Senate knew we're done with this for the year. There's not enough votes. Mm-hmm. Let's go forward on things that really matter, like helping our pharmacies, doing a tax package to get money back into the pockets for the hardworking people of Alabama, the health care thing from Alpha. Mm-hmm. All of that are things that we needed to focus on, and legislation we needed to focus on that affect Alabamians instead of worrying about, are we going to have enough votes for this? And we didn't. So the key is let's make a decision and move forward.
Yeah. And the only reason I bring it up, everywhere we go, we're asked about it. I'm sure the same is for you. Sometimes it feels like we focus too much on the gambling issue, but that's what people ask about every time you're out. Mr. Gudger, thanks so much for your time. Congratulations on your first session as pro tem. I know it's time to get some sleep and everything, but
Amen.
Thank you for being so available to Capital Journal and our viewers as well. Really appreciate your availability.
I always appreciate being able to be on the show, explain our side of what's going on in the Alabama State Senate, because from afar, you don't really understand sometimes things that are happening in the operations, but being on your show allows me to have that voice, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Safe travels.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Alabama Public Television is your place for quality educational services. Free professional development for educators and child care providers. Access to free curriculum-aligned videos, lesson plans, and instructional resources with PBS Learning Media. And all the PBS Kids programs parents know and trust. Learn something new every day with Alabama Public Television. Visit us at aptv.org/education to learn more.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is APT education reporter Trish Crane. Trish, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Well, I wanted to have you on because we're at the end of the legislative session, and it occurs to me it was a big year for education. I mean, it always kind of is because every year they go through passing the budgets and everything, but this was really particularly important. I'll get to some of the particular issues, but let's just start there with the budgets.
Okay.
With the budget, the Education Trust Fund. Another record year. There wasn't much drama associated with the budget, but what are some of the high points that we should know about this Education Trust Fund?
Yeah, I mean, number one, it is a record budget, right? It went up by 6%. I think it's important to start paying attention to how much the budget increases because that's held down by statute. Next year, it can only go up by 5 3/4, right?
Rolling reserve.
Yes, the rolling reserve. And that's to make sure that we're budgeting, lawmakers are budgeting responsibly so that we don't go into proration, right? But yeah, there are a few things. You know, math coaches for the Alabama Numeracy Act. Math coaches are expensive. You know, these are supposed to be expert math teachers. Those are funded. Alabama Reading Initiative is funded. Summer Learning, which in the last 2 years has been covered by federal pandemic relief money, and the state is having to step up and put that money in, and they did. Higher ed kind of held its own. There wasn't really anything that caught my attention. And, you know, same for community colleges. So K-12, you know, typically they're the ones that go up the most in what they receive.
Well, related to that, the legislature passed a really fundamental funding reform in the RAISE Act. And we've talked about this on air multiple times. And I keep saying that this is one of the most, I don't know, underappreciated, undercovered kind of reforms of the last couple of years, because anytime you get into funding and how schools are actually, you know, allocated their funding, it could be controversial, and yet they were able to reform it this year. Talk about the RAISE Act and what the new funding formula does.
So the RAISE Act is basically a mechanism. It has what we call a weighted student formula, where for students that we know take additional resources to educate, kids in poverty, kids with special needs, even gifted children, right? So there is a weight attached to it. So you get this base amount per student plus the weight on top of it. So English learners, you know, there's some districts with a lot of English learners. They're very happy with their new allocation under the RAISE Act. This is, you know, it's the first year. I think one of the reasons that it was very palatable was we kept the foundation program in place.
So that base funding.
Right. So we, you know, schools are used to that. They know what to do with that. The RAISE Act funding being very targeted funding, school districts are going to be held accountable for how they use it, and they're going to have to craft a plan. You know, how are we going to use, if I have this much money to spend on kids with disabilities, how am I going to spend it? And they'll be held accountable for those plans. So, you know, it's a way to get additional money into the school system, into the schools to help with kids who have more challenges, but it also isn't fully funded this year, right? So it's just, I would say, you know, a smidgen. I mean, $166 million, is that really a smidgen? You know, it's a lot of money, but it is not, if it had been fully funded, it would probably be about 5 times that much.
Yeah, and it just, because when everybody's getting the exact same, and yet it costs more to educate those populations of students, then that's when those districts get squeezed, right?
Absolutely,
and, so,
and they have to rely on local money, which in some counties is pretty tough.
Right, absolutely. Cell phone ban. This is a big deal. Governor called for it in her State of the State. The legislature, they debated it. It went through the ringer, so to speak. But talk about this. This is a mandate from the state.
Right.
Schools have to do this.
Right.
So talk about the impact that's going to make.
Well, hopefully it's going to make a great impact, right? I mean, the research is there. Montgomery County Schools did it on their own a couple of years ago. They found that discipline referrals went down. Students were talking with each other. They were talking with each other in the hallways instead of everybody looking down at their phone. I mean, that is I can't even imagine what that's like. When we were in school, we didn't have cell phones, right? So the idea is to take the distraction away. And let kids really get focused on what's happening in school again. I'm sure, some parents are really not happy with this. I mean, there were lawmakers on the floor that weren't happy with this, really concerned about how parents would contact kids if practice got canceled or something like that. And, the answer was, we're going to go old school. You're going to have to go to the office and call your parents. And, I mean, typically there is a little pushback at the front end of this, but then once it gets going, I think kids kind of like it, and parents get used to it.
I just imagining a world where I wasn't allowed to have my cell phone for a certain number of. Of course, I would resist, but I would probably be a lot more, a lot healthier, a lot, less anxious, things like that. And I'm an adult. The kids are even more prone to things like that.
Right. Well, and research shows it does have a negative impact. Cell phone use, this constant cell phone use and social media use, has a negative impact on kids' mental health. So that's another goal. Let's work to improve that.
Another issue: teachers are going to, and all education workers are going to have 2 new benefits this year that they've never had before. One is parental leave for those parents, mothers and fathers. Also, workers' compensation insurance. A lot of folks, in the private sector have both of those things if they take a job. Teachers and education workers didn't. So talk about this as a pretty big deal for education workers.
Well, the paid parental leave was also in Governor Ivey's State of the State. She said it's time. I myself was surprised a few years ago when I learned that teachers did not get paid parental leave. I thought, I've been writing about education for 20 years. Why did I not know this? So other people didn't know it. And Senator Figures and Representative Shaver brought these bills on behalf. Governor Ivey asked them to, and it gives them. It's sort of a minimum. It's generous. It's 8 weeks, where some states are 3 weeks, some states are 6 weeks. So it's a generous paid leave, and it starts July 1st. So
this next school year will be, new parents, and they talked about it as also like a good way to recruit and retain teachers.
Absolutely.
Because if I want to start a family, maybe I want to be in a job that offers something like that.
Oh, yes. And, when we think about teachers, what do we think about? We think about children. So teachers are most likely to want families, and they have to wait. They had to build up that sick leave. I just hope the news gets out to them as quickly as possible so that they can, start. It's one less big, huge thing to worry about, right? If you want to start a family. And then the workers' comp. That's huge too. They have not had workers' comp, which meant they had a different sort of mechanism, but they would have to foot all of their medical bills ahead of time and then ask for reimbursement. That can be a big deal. And you can be out, none of us wants to be having paid $3,000 or $4,000 and wait 6-8 months.
From the Board of Adjustment.
From the Board of Adjustment, yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, so that's a big deal too.
Well, and we're going to watch those laws because we don't yet know exactly how much they're going to cost. And that has come to really be an issue in recent years.
Right.
And this brings me to the next point, the CHOOSE Act. Obviously, the CHOOSE Act was passed last year. School choice, you have, I guess it's $7,000, up to $7,000, where a family can use that to send their kids to a private school, a different public school, things like that. You've done a lot of reporting on this. There were some updates, though, because they had to really backfill some funding because the demand was so strong, right?
Right. Well, so, they opened up applications for the first time this year. They had 37,000 children apply. They expected 14 or 15,000. So we're talking more than twice what was expected. So initially, $100 million was allocated to pay for this first year of education savings accounts. And the budget chairman, both said, look, we support this program. We need to, if people are really serious about this, we need to put up the money to make sure that they can get their funding, because there's an income threshold this year of 300% of the federal poverty level. 75% of Alabama families meet that threshold, but that is a threshold. So they added $80 million in a transfer. They're only going to transfer what was needed, but up to $80 million from the Educational Opportunities Reserve Fund, and that will happen if need be. And then next year, they late in the session, they put together a bill. They added a provision onto an existing sort of tax transfer bill having something to do with taxes. And it said, next year for fiscal year 26, we're going to take $100 million off the top of income tax receipts before we can get to it before October 1st of the new fiscal year.
Explain why that timing is important.
So the academic year starts July 1st. The fiscal year starts October 1st. So there's this, and that is a really important time for parents, because July 1st, that's when they get their accounts. And, they don't get the money, remember. It's in like a bank account, right? And so they have to make deposits to reserve their child's private school seat. They have to do registration fees. There are all sorts of things that they have to be paying for. So that automatic transfer bridges that gap.
I see. Okay. And it is interesting because that record, just large demand was with the income threshold, right? This wasn't the full-blown universal, and so we're going to be watching that. It's really significant that people have bought in that much.
Well, and I want to go ahead and mention, something else that bill did. It sort of brought out, Chairman Orr said, we're not going to be able to just open it up to everybody in 3 years. They call them universal ESAs. The income threshold was supposed to be lifted, and everybody was supposed to be eligible. But he said, we may go up to 315, 325%, but we're not going to be able to just cover everyone who wants an ESA. It's always been dependent on revenue. That was kind of news to me. I had not heard it put that way before.
Well, yeah, I would imagine if there was no income threshold and there's that much demand already, goodness gracious, and if you're going to fund all of it, that could be significant. Could be talking about $1 billion eventually.
Easily.
Well, and we'll be following that. This is going to be implemented this year, and so there's a lot to follow. While we've got you, there were bills that failed this year, and at the top of my list is the religious instruction bill that was carried. It kind of became a big political issue. Talk about this, because it's my understanding that you're talking about off-campus religious instruction. So if a student arranges to have an off-campus, some kind of religious course, they can do that, or it's allowed. Districts are allowed to set these things up, but this bill would have mandated it. Is that right?
Yes, and so it's called Release Time Religious Instruction. You'll see RTRI. That's sort of the acronym for it, and it's been available in Alabama since 2019. There was a Supreme Court decision many years ago that said, look, you can do off-campus during the school day religious instruction. You can't do it with taxpayer money, and you can't do it on campus. But if it's private funds and all of that is taken care of. So there are groups that have been working in Alabama since 2019 where they have, it's a very individualized program. You might have one district that allows only their elementary schoolers to go, and it has to be at the end of the day. Or you might have high schoolers that only the high schoolers can go at one certain period of the day. And what will happen is the ministry will come and transport the kids to this and then bring them back, right? During the school day. And
so they can do that right now. Any district can do that, but this bill would have kind of forced the issue.
Yes, and the people who, the lawmakers who pushed it said, yeah, they can, but they're not. And and parents are being turned down because the districts are saying, well, we don't have a policy. And so this bill would have made them create a policy, and that would have interfered with local control, right? I mean, we are a local control state. We really like having that discretion at the local control for the boards of education. So this bill, what the term is, when you look at the original 2019 law, it says they may write a policy. This would have changed the may to shall. And that's sort of a catchphrase of this movement, because it really is a movement across the country.
Right, with this LifeWise group around doing this in other states around the country.
Right.
There's a big lobbying push to do it here, but
right.
came up short. I imagine we'll see that next time. Trish, we're out of time, but we're going to continue this conversation on Spotlight on Education. It's coming up next month, so I encourage people to tune in for that. But thank you for your coverage of education issues. I mean, it's such a big, important, complicated issue, but you simplify it for us. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that. I hope so. That's my goal.
Okay. Thanks again. We'll be right back.
Birmingham, Alabama native Fannie Flagg, who is best known for her novel Fried Green Tomatoes, had a long career as an actress and comedian before dedicating herself to writing. Published in 1987, Fried Green Tomatoes, a story of racial and gender inequalities told through the unlikely but strong bonds of its female characters, resonated with audiences. The novel stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for 36 weeks and was adapted into a critically acclaimed movie.
That's our show for this week and the last of the 2025 legislative session. Thank you for joining us throughout the session and for all the feedback we've received. I especially want to thank our Capitol Journal team. Of course, Randy, Jeff, and Alex, who you see every week, but also the guys behind the scenes that make the show possible. John Holman, Rod Richardson, and A.J. Williams. Excellent work this session. And for that Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.